What if I told you that one of the most devastating galactic conflicts in Star Wars history was triggered not by armies or political ideologies, but by a single red gemstone? A jewel so sacred that its theft would reignite ancient hatreds and plunge entire worlds into chaos. This is the story of the sacred Firestone of King Skrawll and how Count Dooku used it as the perfect weapon to destabilize the Republic years before the Clone Wars even began. Picture this. Somewhere in the galaxy, nestled within the pristine halls of the Republic Museum, sits what appears to be an ordinary statue. But this isn't just any piece of art. This is the hope of Glee Anselm, carved from two of the most precious royal jewels in the galaxy, representing centuries of peace between two species who shared the same world. At its heart burns a polyhedral red gemstone, no larger than a human palm, yet worth more than entire star systems. This is our sacred Firestone, and it's about to become the catalyst for one of the most intricate schemes in galactic history. To understand why this gemstone matters so much, we need to journey to the aquatic world of Glee Anselm, a planet that most Star Wars fans know as the homeworld of Kit Fisto, the famous Nautolan Jedi Master. But Glee Anselm isn't just home to the Nautolans. Deep beneath its oceans, in the crushing depths where sunlight never reaches, lives another species entirely: the Anselmi. These aren't your typical Star Wars aliens. The Anselmi are a proud, ancient people with their own rich culture and history, including their own royal lineage stretching back to the legendary King Skrawll. Now, King Skrawll isn't just some forgotten monarch. He was the ruler who united the Anselmi during their golden age, and his sacred Firestone became the ultimate symbol of their people's strength and divine right to rule. This wasn't just jewelry, this was a holy relic passed down through generations of Anselmi nobility, carrying with it the spiritual weight of an entire civilization. For centuries, the Anselmi and Nautolans lived in harmony on Glee Anselm. They shared the planet's vast oceans, with the Nautolans dominating the middle depths and the Anselmi ruling the abyssal plains. During this golden age of cooperation, something extraordinary happened. The two species' most precious royal jewels, the sacred Firestone of King Skrawll and the Nautilan's own Leviathan gem, were crafted together into a single, magnificent statue. The hope of Glee Anselm wasn't just art, it was a political statement. Picture it. Two precious gems, each representing the sovereignty of their respective peoples, united atop a stylized wave that symbolized the flowing harmony between the species. The wave itself was genius symbolism, representing how the Anselmi and Nautolans could coexist in the same ocean without conflict, each finding their place in the depths. But here's where our story takes a dark turn. Something happened on Glee Anselm. The details are lost to history, but the harmony shattered. The Anselmi and Nautolans went to war, a brutal conflict that raged across the ocean floors and turned the peaceful waters of Glee Anselm into a battlefield. During this chaos, the hope of Glee Anselm was lost to both peoples, eventually finding its way into the Republic Museum, where it became one of their most prized possessions. Fast forward to around 33 years before the Battle of Yavin, just a few years before the events of the Phantom Menace, the Republic under Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum was desperately trying to maintain peace across the galaxy. Valorum, who we know from the prequel films as the well-meaning but ultimately ineffective leader who would be replaced by Palpatine, was genuinely trying to solve the crisis on Glee Anselm. The war between the Anselmi and Nautolans was tearing the planet apart, disrupting trade routes and threatening to spill over into neighboring systems. Valorum saw an opportunity for a grand gesture that would demonstrate the Republic's commitment to peace. He authorized something unprecedented: the release of the Hope of Glee Anselm from the Republic Museum, to be returned to the people of Glee Anselm as a symbol of renewed unity. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. Representatives from both species would meet at the regional Republic headquarters on Jaloria, a neutral world where they could conduct their peace negotiations. There, Governor Tok would present the Hope of Glee Anselm to both delegations, and the sight of their united royal jewels would remind them of the harmony they once shared. But there was a problem with this plan. Actually, there were several problems. and they all centered around one man, Count Dooku. Now, this is where the story gets really interesting because we're seeing Dooku's political manipulation in action years before he became Darth Tyrannus. At this point in the timeline, Dooku was still a Jedi, but he was already becoming disillusioned with the Republic. He was beginning to see the corruption and inefficiency that would eventually drive him to the dark side, and he was starting to take action to destabilize the very government he was supposed to serve. Dooku's plan was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. He didn't need to deploy armies or orchestrate massive battles. All he needed was to ensure that this peace treaty failed spectacularly, reigniting the war on Glianselm and providing yet another example of the Republic's inability to maintain order. But how do you sabotage a peace treaty? You target the very symbol of that peace. Working through intermediaries, Dooku identified the perfect pawn, Ambassador Firestone, a Nautolan diplomat who was part of the peace delegation. We don't know exactly how Dooku's agents approached Firestone, but we can imagine the kinds of arguments they might have used. Perhaps they appealed to Nautolan pride, suggesting that the Anselmi didn't deserve to share custody of the hope of Glianselm. Maybe they offered him wealth or power, or perhaps they simply convinced him that the peace treaty was doomed to fail anyway, and he might as well profit from its collapse. Whatever the method, Firok was recruited to Dooku's cause. But here's the genius of the plan. Firok wasn't told to simply steal the hope of Glianselm. Instead, he was instructed to replace it with a forgery. This wasn't just theft. It was a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to sow maximum chaos and confusion. The forgery was crafted with incredible attention to detail. It had to fool not just casual observers, but the cultural experts and delegates who would be examining it closely. The fake sacred Firestone of King Skrawll was particularly well made, incorporating the correct polyhedral shape and deep red color that made the original so distinctive. But there was a crucial flaw built into the forgery. It was made of brittle materials that would shatter under pressure, revealing its true nature at the worst possible moment. The ceremony on Jaloria was meant to be a triumph of Republican diplomacy. Governor Tok, representing the Republic's authority, would present the hope of Glianselm to the assembled delegates, demonstrating that the Republic could be trusted to protect and preserve the cultural heritage of its member worlds. The Anselmi delegates, seeing their sacred Firestone after so many years of separation, would be moved to make peace with their Nautolan neighbors. But when the moment came, something went wrong almost immediately. The Anselmi delegates, seeing what they believed to be their sacred Firestone, became agitated rather than peaceful. They began proclaiming that the Firestone belonged with their people, not in some shared monument. The careful symbolism of the hope of Glianselm was lost on them. All they could see was their stolen holy relic, finally within reach. Then, just as tensions were reaching a breaking point, disaster struck. A crew of Nautolan thieves burst into the ceremony and, in a recorded incident that would be broadcast across the galaxy, stole the hope of Glianselm right from under the noses of Republic security. The theft was brazen, violent, and completely destroyed any chance of the peace treaty succeeding. But here's the thing. These thieves weren't working for Dooku. They were independent operators who had somehow learned about the ceremony and decided to steal what they thought was one of the galaxy's most valuable artifacts. They had no idea they were stealing a forgery, and they certainly had no idea they were playing right into Dooku's hands. The theft was a disaster for everyone involved. The Anselmi delegates were furious, convinced that this was all a Nautolan plot to steal their sacred Firestone. The Nautolan delegates were equally outraged, seeing the theft as an attack on their own cultural heritage. Governor Tok was left with the impossible task of explaining to the Republic Senate how a priceless artifact had been stolen during a peace ceremony under his watch. In the chaos that followed, most of the Nautolan thieves were killed, but one survived. Nakano Lash, a young Nautolan who managed to escape with the forged hope of Glianselm. Lash fled Jaloria aboard a garbage scow carrying what she believed to be one of the most valuable artifacts in the galaxy. She had no idea that she was carrying a fake, and she certainly had no idea that she was about to become the target of one of the most dangerous bounty hunters in the galaxy. Meanwhile, The political situation was deteriorating rapidly. A group of 5 Anselmi, operating in secret, traveled to Coruscant to track down the thieves and recover their sacred Firestone. These weren't diplomats or politicians. These were Anselmi warriors on a mission of cultural preservation. They made contact with a human information broker, hoping to learn the location of the stolen artifact. But they weren't the only ones looking for the thieves. Governor Tok, desperate to recover the hope of Glee Anselm and salvage the peace process, had hired his own agent, Jango Fett, the legendary bounty hunter who would later become the template for the clone army. Fett tracked the Anselmi to Coruscant and, in a confrontation that left all 5 aliens dead, eliminated what he saw as competition for his bounty. This is where we see Jango Fett in his element. Years before he would become embroiled in the Clone Wars, he was working independently, taking contracts from Republic officials and using his skills to track down criminals and recover stolen property. But he wasn't the only bounty hunter interested in this case. Aura Singh, Fett's former partner and rival, was also on the trail of Nakano Lash. Singh was a different kind of hunter than Fett, more ruthless and less concerned with the political implications of her actions. She saw the hope of Glee Anselm as a valuable prize, and she was determined to claim it for herself. The chase led both bounty hunters to Roxuli, a backwater planet where Nakano Lash had been trying to lay low. Lash had been transported there by Renzo Ciliac, a salvage yard operator who had helped her escape from Halatron 7, but she couldn't hide forever, and eventually both Fett and Singh tracked her down to a cantina on the outskirts of a local settlement. What happened next would change everything. Fett confronted Lash outside the cantina, demanding that she surrender the stolen artifact. Singh arrived moments later, creating a 3-way standoff that could have erupted into violence at any moment. But Lash, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, made a desperate decision. To prove to both bounty hunters that the situation was more complicated than they realized, Lash revealed the hope of Glee Anselm. But when Singh demanded that she hand it over, Lash did something that shocked everyone present. She smashed the artifact against a wall, shattering it completely. The brittle materials of the forgery couldn't withstand the impact. The fake hope of Glee Anselm crumbled to pieces, revealing its true nature to the assembled bounty hunters. The sacred Firestone of King Skrawll, which had seemed so real and valuable, was nothing more than colored glass and cheap metal. This revelation changed everything. Fett and Singh realized that they had been chasing a fake, which meant that the real hope of Glee Anselm was still out there somewhere. But where and who had it? The answer lay back on Jaloria, in the guest quarters of Ambassador Firok. While everyone had been focused on tracking down the thieves, the real culprit had been hiding in plain sight. Firok had kept the genuine hope of Glee Anselm in his rooms, probably planning to smuggle it off-world once the heat died down. Fett and Singh returned to Jaloria with evidence of Firok's deception, but their arrival was complicated by the presence of other bounty hunters who had been tracking Fett for reasons of their own. A firefight erupted at the Regional Republic headquarters, with Fett and Singh fighting off multiple attackers while trying to present their evidence to Governor Tok. During the chaos, Singh slipped away unnoticed, leaving Fett and his camera droid RX-56 to handle the political fallout. When the smoke cleared, Fett was able to present his evidence to Tok and the assembled delegates, revealing Firok's role in the theft of the sacred Firestone of King Skrawll. The revelation was devastating for any hope of peace. The lead Anselmi delegate, already suspicious of Nautolan motives, declared that such treachery could not be tolerated. The fact that a Nautolan diplomat had stolen their sacred Firestone was seen as an act of war, and the Anselmi delegation immediately announced that hostilities would resume on Glee Anselm. Governor Tok ordered a search of Firok's quarters, which turned up the real hope of Glee Anselm. But there was one final twist. Both royal jewels had been removed from the statue. While everyone had been focused on the political implications of the theft, Aura Singh had quietly stolen both the sacred Firestone of King Skrawll and the Leviathan gem, making off with the two most valuable artifacts in the entire affair. The theft of the sacred Firestone was later reported on HoloNet News, but by then it was too late. The peace treaty had failed, the war on Glee Anselm had resumed, and Count Dooku's plan had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. The Republic had been embarrassed on the galactic stage, proving once again that it was incapable of maintaining order or protecting the cultural heritage of its member worlds. But the real tragedy of this story isn't the political failure or even the renewed war on Glee Anselm. It's the fact that a sacred relic, a symbol of ancient wisdom and cultural continuity, had been reduced to nothing more than a bargaining chip in a game of galactic politics. The sacred Firestone of King Skrawll, which had represented the spiritual heart of the Anselmi people for generations, was now in the hands of a bounty hunter who saw it as nothing more than a valuable prize. This story, which appears in the Jango Fett comic series from Marvel Comics, shows us a different side of the Star Wars galaxy. It's not about Jedi and Sith or the grand conflict between the Republic and the Separatists. Instead, it's about the smaller, more personal conflicts that shaped the galaxy in the years before the Clone Wars. It's about cultural identity, political manipulation, and the way that ancient hatreds can be weaponized by those who understand how to exploit them. The sacred Firestone of King Skrawll reminds us that in the Star Wars galaxy, even the smallest objects can have enormous significance. A single gemstone, no larger than a human palm, was enough to reignite a war and destabilize an entire star system. It shows us how Count Dooku was already working to undermine the Republic years before he openly declared himself a separatist leader, using subtle manipulation and political intrigue rather than military force. And perhaps most importantly, it shows us that the Clone Wars didn't begin with the Battle of Geonosis. The real war, the war for the soul of the galaxy, had been going on for years, fought not with lightsabers and blasters, but with forgeries and lies, with stolen relics and broken promises. The sacred Firestone of King Skrawll was just one small piece of that larger conflict, but it was a piece that mattered deeply to the people whose lives it affected. In the end, the Firestone's journey from sacred relic to stolen prize reflects the broader tragedy of the Star Wars galaxy during this period. Ancient traditions were being corrupted, cultural bonds were being severed, and the very foundations of civilization were being undermined by those who saw chaos as an opportunity for advancement. The sacred Firestone of King Skrawll wasn't just a gemstone, it was a symbol of everything the galaxy was losing in its slide toward war.